Happy Monday morning, everybody. I'm Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust, and we are finally here at Munfordville. We're at the westernmost spot on our western swing, the one you, the members and supporters of the organization, helped us to fund, so thank you for having us out here. Many of you might not have been to Munfordville, beautiful Munfordville, and you can see Green River Bridge perhaps behind me over there. I might be blocking it there, but we are going to be talking about September of 1862 here. By way of reminder, some of you may have seen yesterday, we were at the Battle of Richmond Visitor Center and out on the battlefield a little bit. This is part of a two-pronged movement in 1862 where you're going to have Braxton Bragg and Kirby Smith moving up. Let me see if I can do it backward like this, with Smith moving over here and Bragg moving over there. Smith goes up, bypasses Cumberland Gap, goes to and wins at the Battle of Richmond, moves on to Lexington and on to Frankfort as well. Bragg, for his part, has bypassed expected areas that the Union force under Don Carlos Buell expected him to take, and he manages to get sort of ahead of Buell, and he's going to end up here at a critical railroad bridge near Rowlett Station and at Munfordville, Kentucky. And this is great. I'm really happy to have Tres Seymour here. His family owned and owns a lot of the battlefield itself. Retired National Park Service historian, loves talking about Munfordville. So come on, Trace, set up the stage. What's Rowlett Station? Why are the troops here? What's Munfordville?
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me here to talk to you folks about Munfordville. Welcome to the Battle for the Bridge Historic Preserve. The preserve is here, frankly, because of a partnership that the American Battlefield Trust has been an integral part of. There are hundreds of acres here that are preserved, and dozens of those are trust preserved acres. So we are so grateful to the trust for being a partner with us here. Now, Bragg arrived in Glasgow, and he never meant to come here. Glasgow's about half an hour away to the southeast of us. He never meant to come here. But he had a general, James R. Chalmers, who came to Cave City, which is about a dozen miles to the south, and he got word from a spy that there was a weak Union garrison here at a place called Fort Craig in Munfordville. That was John T. Wilder in command of about 1,400 troops, and Chalmers decided it was going to be a feather in his cap if he could take that garrison and then go back to Bragg and brag about how he had captured the bridge that was crossing the Green River, because basically there was nothing between Bragg's 26,000 troops and hundreds of guns between him and all of those forces and Louisville, Kentucky, but one bridge over Green River. So early in the morning on September 14th of 1862, Chalmers arrives here at Rowlett Station, just over the hump to the south, with all of those forces, and sets them in order to attack both Fort Craig and its associated stockade and their rifle trenches, in the hopes of quickly taking them and taking the entire position for the Confederacy.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thanks, Trace. So, by way of reminder here, remember Kentucky, it might seem like by 1862, oh, the Union's moved on, they've captured Nashville, they're going down toward, Mississippi. But this Bragg's campaign, Bragg and Smith sort of really, changes the game, or at least potentially, or at least for a time, because all of a sudden they're through Tennessee. They're going up toward Ohio. And if the Confederates can hang on to Kentucky, really they can threaten Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois. It's really right knocking on the doorstep of the North. And remember, this is happening at the same time as the Maryland campaign here. If you ever don't know why you don't hear a lot about Munfordville, just imagine trying for your battle, your news, farther west to compete with the Battle of Sharpsburg-Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation. So it doesn't mean it's any less important. Abraham Lincoln couldn't believe that the North's western sort of successes couldn't, garner the same attention as the eastern ones. So we have to keep that in mind while we're doing this. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are live at the Munfordville battlefield. We are sort of to the east of the Green River Bridge, where some of the fighting culminated, and a lot of which happened around this land here. So let's get it a little bit further here. Trace already set the stage. What's really going to happen next?
Well, what happens next is that in detail, the 10th Mississippi and the 44th Mississippi are sent up along the western side of the railroad track. The 7th, 29th, and 9th Mississippi, along with half of Ketchum's battery of 2 mountain howitzers, are sent to Cardin's Knob on the east side of the railroad track, and they begin to advance toward the Union positions. Now, the 10th Mississippi goes along the flank of Mrs. Lewis's Hill, and they take up a position against the stockade on the western side. Unfortunately, it's early in the morning in September, and they discover in the fog an abattis of felled trees with sharpened limbs, which brings them up, as you might understand, to a sudden stop, because they really don't want to try to find their way through that. At the same time, the mountain howitzers of Ketchum's battery begin firing on the fort on the east side from Cardin's Knob, but they are mountain howitzers, so they don't really have the range. So they begin to move up closer, along with Richardson's battalion of sharpshooters, to try to get a little bit closer to the fort. Now, at that time, a messenger from the 10th Mississippi goes back to Chalmers and says, there's an abattis here. But Chalmers doesn't want to hear this. He says, you go ahead and you start that attack because we want to get this thing done. Well, at that time, Colonel John Wilder hears the firing of the cannons from Cardin's Knob and sets fire to a church that's right up next to Fort Craig because he doesn't want the Confederates to use it as a place to sharpshoot his men from. Well, now Chalmers sees a big flame come up next to Fort Craig and assumes that the men on his east side, on his right flank, have begun their attack too early. So then he sends an order for the right flank to begin to attack, even as the men of the 10th Mississippi have begun their attack and are being felled by the sharpshooters of the stockade as they try to get through the abattis.
Now, this is great. So we've got people from all over. We might have an international visitor here as well on the page. We've got more than 200 people watching. Share this with your friends so as many people can see it as possible. And I'll say that I already saw some people from New York, from Michigan, from Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's a beautiful morning there apparently as well. Somebody was asking whether Wilder already had his repeaters at this point. My understanding is no, he did not have his famous repeaters. In fact, Wilder was kind of working in manufacturing not long before this. He was not a super experienced soldier at this time. Somebody else was asking which parts of which battlefield are accessible. Hopefully we can talk about that just a little bit later. And if you are watching from out of the country, I see someone speaking what looks like French to me. Don't quote me. I hope you'll tell us where you're from. So everybody tell us where you're from. And I saw that we just flashed up a picture of Wilder. Now, if you're wondering what the Confederates are doing here, Chalmers has a very limited force compared to Bragg's entire force, right? Chalmers is trying to do things on his own for a while. He's really trying to go toward Fort Craig, but why isn't he just going over toward the bridge? I mean, it would be great to really just interdict and secure that railroad bridge, but I think there's some Yankees over there as well, right?
That's right. What we have is a star fort on one side of the river, of the railroad track, and a stockade on the other side, and both of them have guns. They're firing in support of each other. You can't take out just one, you have to take out both of them, because otherwise the other one is going to fire its guns in support and reduce your infantry. So you have to kind of take them both out at once. And this is the problem, because Chalmers is not organizing his attack properly. If he had done it properly, then he would have launched a two-pronged attack that would have occupied the guns on both the fort and the stockade at once, which would have made it impossible for them to fire in support of one another. But this isn't what happens. Instead, the 10th Mississippi gets pinned down, and then the forces attacking the fort get pinned down, and then Blythe's 44th Mississippi comes up in support of the 10th, and it gets pinned down, and so the whole attack falls apart.
Good. Let's take that a little bit further then. Okay, so things aren't going to go well for Chalmers on this first day. Bragg, he's going to have to tell Bragg. Bragg's going to find out, right? And Bragg has a lot more forces he's going to bring here. And between him and sort of Simon Bolivar Buckner, there's a plan emerging here on how to really do this.
Well, Bragg is not happy. In fact, when Chalmers has to report back to Bragg in Glasgow about this debacle, Bragg is livid. This is an unauthorized and injudicious attack, he reports. But he doesn't just decide to move on. He does what he didn't plan to do to begin with, and he pulls the entire shooting match up and brings it to Munfordville. Now, if you were to look around us all, the entire area is surrounded by knobs. There's Carden's Knob, Rowlett's Knob, Terry's Hill, Mrs. Lewis's Hill over here, a long low hill that comes up the flank of which the 10th Mississippi moved down along, the Summerseat Knob, and then as you move north of the bridge, you see that the river heights on the north side of the river actually overlook the military position. All of these high points were occupied by Confederate artillery once Bragg arrived. He put guns on all of these, and then he surrounded the entire area with his infantry and cavalry, 26,000 strong. Now, in the latter part of the day on the 14th, Wilder is also reinforced by Colonel Cyrus Dunham to get to about 4,300 men, but that's still a considerable deficit. And that leaves Wilder with a decision to make. And this is what Gary has been referring to when we talk about the action concerning General Simon Bolivar Buckner.
So Buckner, if I'm correct, grew up here. This is his town. And he starts telling Bragg, oh, there's a little country store. There's an orchard there. Bragg's like, whatever. And he's like, no, the orchard overlooks everything else. Okay, if we can get some troops way around, and by the way, I know of a ford, and if we can get some of those troops on the other side of the Green River, maybe several miles upriver, the Union won't even know we're there. We can be in their rear with numerous guns. We've got plenty of cannons to hit them in front, flank, and from the rear, and we can really surround them. So here you've got the Union with, dwindling choices at this point, right? So maybe if we could get real quick into this Dunham and Wilder thing. Dunham, is going to think we should surrender, right? And he's going to write to his boss, Gilbert.
Oh, Cyrus Dunham actually takes command when he arrives because he's senior.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Which is a problem because Cyrus Dunham thinks, oh, well, we need to surrender. This is obviously an untenable situation. Now, by some miracle, the telegraph lines are still intact, headed back to Louisville. So he telegraphs back to his boss in Louisville, we need to surrender this position. He gets an answer back. It says, you need to hold out. Well, he telegraphs back his disagreement with this, and the answer comes back, please turn over your command to Colonel Wilder. So he does so. Well, Colonel Wilder is not sure what to do at this point. Now, this isn't the Colonel Wilder of the big stone monument at Chickamauga. This isn't the Colonel Wilder who will become a hero later in the war. This is the Colonel Wilder who is an industrialist and has just started soldiering. And he's not sure what to do, except he knows better than to send a telegraph to Louisville, because he knows what's going to happen if he does. So bear in mind now, he's surrounded, and some sporadic fighting has been going on back and forth on the 15th. There's some sort of gentlemanly activity happening after the fighting on the 14th. There's some messages from the Confederates, may we please borrow some shovels to bury our dead. The Union graciously gives them shovels to do that. They send out a flat car to help them move their dead, and it's early, still early in the war. People are still relatively civil for a civil war, but things are coming to a boil here in Munfordville because things are getting serious with the numbers of soldiers, the number of guns, and what's a colonel to do in this kind of situation? And he makes a decision that you're not usually going to expect a colonel to do late in the night on the 16th.
Yeah, if I may, Trace, jump back on if I'm stealing any of your thunder here. He goes under blindfold into the Confederate lines. He is eventually introduced to General Simon Bolivar Buckner, and he sort of tells Buckner, I don't know if he did this on purpose, but it works. He says, I really don't know what to do here. I need your advice whether I should surrender or not, right? I mean, and that put Buckner in a tough position, right?
Well, Buckner is sitting in his tent in camp, and this blindfolded soldier is brought into his tent in the middle of the night, and Buckner's absolutely flabbergasted because the soldier says exactly what Gary told him, and Buckner says, "Wars are not fought this way." Now, you have to understand something about General Simon Bolivar Buckner. Munfordville native, he's a gentleman's gentleman, and he knows this field intimately because he took over this field as soon as the war started and turned it into a camp of instruction for beginning Confederate soldiers. He became a teacher of sorts. Bear this in mind, a teacher. Then he went on to Fort Donelson, and we know what happens to General Buckner at Fort Donelson. He's captured. He's captured by his very good friend, General Ulysses S. Grant, and he's put into prison. So he's given a humbling experience there. He knows what it's like to have to surrender. So here we are in the dead of night on the 16th of September, and here comes this young Union officer saying, "Sir, I really don't know what I ought to do. I don't know if I should surrender or not."
Yeah, and we got to wrap this up pretty soon. So, I mean, really, and Buckner's in a tough position. He is a gentleman, and he's like, "Well, I want to help you, but I'm not going to tell you what to do." He's like, "Well, what do you think I should do?" He's like, "I'm not really going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. We've got a lot of cannons. We've got a lot of troops." He's like, "Do you?" He's like, "Yeah, you want to see them?" And they go on this nighttime tour of the Confederate positions, at the end of which, Wilder basically says, I think I better surrender. And Buckner's like, "Yeah, I think you should."
Actually,
correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, actually, that's the way it ends up. But when they get done with the tour, Buckner says, "All right, you've seen what we have. Now you have to decide what you should do." And Wilder says, "I guess we should surrender." But Buckner's a teacher now.
Yeah.
So he says, "Well, now wait. Before you make that decision, you have to decide. Will holding out be of benefit to your forces elsewhere in the field?" But Wilder doesn't have any of that information because he hasn't sent any information up to Louisville or got anything back. So he ultimately decides that yes, he'll surrender. But he says, "Now let's talk about terms." He's in no position to talk about terms, but Buckner is such a man that he allows it. And they stack their arms. The officers are allowed to keep sidearms and mounts. They march themselves proudly out of the works and down to their forces at Rowlett Station, and the whole thing is concluded at 2 in the morning on the 17th of September, which leaves Bragg in the most powerful position that a Confederate officer will occupy in the Western Theater anytime during the Civil War.
That's great. So a few things there. One, September 17th, and I see Mary Averill's watching, so we got to talk about Antietam again. As in approach to the Antietam, you're aware that the largest surrender of U.S. troops during the whole war had taken place just during this Battle of Munfordville on September 15th at Harper's Ferry, okay? But nobody here at Munfordville knows this, certainly not Wilder, and there was no experience really with surrendering mass numbers of Union troops. So what are we supposed to do? Do we parole them? Do we keep them? Everything like that. So they have to work through some of that stuff. And then as to Bragg being in a strong position here, he is ahead of Don Carlos Buell. He is astride his communications. He can interdict him in his trying to get toward Louisville. But he's won a great tactical victory, but strategically he's in a terrible place. He doesn't have provisions, and this is a classic Bragg. I mean, and you can blame him or not blame him. I'm not as much a Bragg detractor. He's hard to like, but at places like Stones River, Perryville, and Munfordville, everybody seems to just want him to stay. Stay where he is. But, you have to feed troops. You have a lot going on. And maybe for a last thought here, because we really got to wrap this up,
Sure.
Trace.
Well, actually, last thought here. This actually isn't that strategically a bad place for Bragg because he's got guns on every high point around here. He's got a natural barrier in the Green River, and Buell has to come here. In fact, he's on his way. His advanced forces are about to arrive. And 2 days later, Bragg leaves. Historians are torn about why. The main theory is basically that there's nothing to eat here. But there are some historical sources that consider this a high water mark in the West for Confederate power, because had Bragg stayed and fought Buell at this place, then a major conflict could have been resolved here. Instead, Buell abandons this place, and what happens later is Perryville.
Yeah. Bragg abandons the place.
Bragg abandons.
So that's the story of Munfordville. You know, for those of you who've been really watching, our first day of filming, you saw a lot of, or second day maybe, a lot of Union success in West Virginia. Those of you who are following the Confederacy a little bit more might have liked what you heard at Richmond yesterday. You're liking what you're hearing today. Maybe you didn't like Tebbs Bend so much, and you're gonna have something for everyone coming up if we can make it to Perryville before long and to see other places as well. Now, as for this battlefield trace, we're standing, I mean, you could just see how beautiful it is. I don't think we've been in a more beautiful spot on this entire trip of beautiful spots right here. But here we are sort of east of the bridge. You can see the bridge over there. I believe there's a stockade down there, and you can see some of the other preserved land. And I just think, you know, sometimes it's messy, but the battle for the bridge preserve, the Hart County Historical Society, the cemetery outfit that owns Fort Craig, and the American Battlefield Trust, we cannot accomplish this work without all working together.
Absolutely. The Battle for the Bridge Historic Preserve is a partnership. We're not a governmental organization. Hart County Historical Society, Green River Cemetery and Fort Craig, Inc., the American Battlefield Trust, private landowners who have given perpetual easements that protect this battlefield in perpetuity. We encourage anyone who is able to contribute to the preservation of battlefields. We encourage landowners who would consider granting a perpetual easement over their land to preserve these lands so that you can keep the view of something that calls the idea of history into mind whenever you continue to visit these places, and keep this for the future.
And I just put some hand sanitizer on my hand here, and I have in my hand something I'm going to hand to Trace here, and that is one of the American Battlefield Trust Challenge coins for all the great work that he and his family have done to help preserve this land on which we stand and elsewhere here at Perryville. So Trace, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
And thank you all for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.